BBC Children in Need. We're there for you.
This is BBC Radio 4. It's 5 o'clock, time for PM with Carolyn Quinn.
Three days of rail strikes are called off at late notice. So late, in fact, that Network Rail says there'll still be reduced services. We'll get the latest. The Prime Minister tries to put to rest doubts about his green credentials.
The UK's COP presidency may be coming to an end, but our global leadership will continue.
But will developing countries be able to persuade richer ones to pay for damage already being wreaked across the world?
There's a lot of money for war in the system always when it's needed. I don't think it's an impossible ask.
We'll hear from a UN climate negotiator. Also on the programme, a warning for Twitter from one of the hundreds who've been sacked by email in the last few hours.
Discussions will be had. They will find out that I have a lot of experience with employment tribunals, and I know what I'm talking about.
Other layoffs and necessary slimming down of the company. We'll ask a former vice president of it. And
she give me money when I'm in need. Yeah, she's a kind.
What do the most streamed songs reveal about what makes a tune endure? Let's start with the BBC News, read today by Andrew Peach.
A series of planned rail strikes due to begin tomorrow have been suspended. Network Rail welcomed the move but warned there could still be delays and cancellations for travellers. Here's our business correspondent Ramzan Kamali.
The RMT has now said it will enter a period of intensive negotiations with Network Rail and the rail companies to resolve this ongoing dispute over pay and conditions. Strikes first started back in June this year. The RMT General Secretary, Mick Lynch, said the threat of strike action had made the rail employers see sense, but warned that if the union felt the need to take action during the next 6 months, it would. Network Rail says that due to the late notice, services tomorrow that had been cancelled are very unlikely to be reinstated and has advised passengers to check before they travel, and on Saturday and Monday to only travel by rail if absolutely necessary.
The government has denied suggestions it was reviewing plans to build a new nuclear plant in Suffolk, as part of cost-cutting measures set to be announced in the autumn statement. But it said a rail scheme in the north of England could be scaled back. The details from Mark Ashton.
Sizewell C is set to be built in Suffolk and once operational could produce 7% of the UK's electricity, enough to power 6 million homes. The project is a joint venture with the French government and, as a 2019 Conservative manifesto commitment, would be politically hard to cancel. Downing Street has moved to quash rumours it could now be delayed or reviewed. But a major rail scheme known as Northern Powerhouse Rail does look like being significantly scaled back. Liz Truss promised the high-speed link would connect towns and cities from Hull to Liverpool via Bradford. But the new Business Secretary, Grant Shapps, said he believed the government was already delivering on its levelling up agenda to improve rail services and cut journey times in the north of England. He said there was not much point in blasting new tunnels through the Pennines.
The King's been hosting a reception at Buckingham Palace ahead of the COP27 climate conference. King Charles has long championed environmental issues but won't attend the talks in Egypt. The Prime Minister Rishi Sunak addressed the gathered dignitaries, saying there'd be more human suffering if climate change was allowed to continue ravaging the planet. 70 tourists, including a number of Britons on a boat trip in northern Peru, have been detained by an indigenous group. Local protesters said they were trying to draw attention to how the authorities had failed to take action on oil spills in a river in the area. Scotland's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon has denied the awarding of a contract to a Scottish company to build ferries as a case of jobs for the boys. She was giving evidence to a Holyrood committee about the project, which is late and over budget. Our Scotland correspondent is James Shaw.
Nicola Sturgeon was answering questions about a contract to build 2 ferries, which is 5 years late and could be 3 times more expensive than the original price tag of £97 million. This morning, a Conservative member of the committee said that Jim McColl, whose company owned Ferguson Shipyard, was a well-known supporter of independence and close friend of the SNP. He summed it up as a monumental scandal. Ms Sturgeon said she was not aware of impropriety in the procurement process.
The English National Opera is to move its headquarters out of London and will see its budget cut drastically in a big shake-up of English arts organisations. More Arts Council funding will be targeted outside the capital, with money going to organisations including the Shakespeare North Theatre in Prescott, libraries in Barnsley, Warwickshire and East Yorkshire, and Blackpool's Illuminations. The head of the Arts Council, Sinik Sirota, said it was a chance to open up art to everyone.
We've invested so that as many people as possible in England can enjoy the very best of creativity. This means no matter where you live, whatever your background, you'll have culture close to your home.
The head of the Arts Council, Sinik Sirota.
Andrew, thanks very much. If you were bracing yourself for more rail disruption tomorrow, Monday and Wednesday, well, there is some good news and some bad news. The good news, the RMT union says that the strikes planned for those days have been suspended. But Network Rail warns that the late notice means that services on Saturday will remain extremely limited, and trains on Monday are also likely to be affected. Mark Ashdown is our transport correspondent here with me. This announcement wasn't expected. Why now?
Well, that's the question. Yeah, we were due to, as you say, have these strikes tomorrow, also Monday and Wednesday, involving thousands of members of the RMT union at 14 rail operators. Crucially, though, Network Rail involved as well. That's signalling staff, and that creates widespread disruption across the whole network. Now, the good news, yes, it's been called off, but it's very much at the 11th hour. So the bad news, don't expect many trains to run tomorrow even so. Network Rail welcomed this decision, but said because of such late notice, the services which had been cancelled cannot now be reinstated. They've already set up, if you like, a strike timetable, and it's too late now to unpick all that to run more services. So they will be extremely limited. About 20%, about a fifth of the network across England, Scotland and Wales will be running. Some areas, though, will see no trains still. Those that do run will start much later and finish much earlier, possibly as early as the early evening. The strong advice is to check before you travel and really only do venture onto the rails if it's absolutely necessary.
Are you picking up any sense of what's happening behind the scenes then, Mark?
Well, look, it's all part of this long-running dispute, isn't it, about pay, jobs and working conditions. This is, though, an unusual move, I have to say. It's the first time the RMT have called off a strike for negotiations. They did call one off in the period of mourning for Queen Elizabeth, but this late in the day, this is pretty unique. Now, they say they've secured intensive negotiations with the rail companies, and they do want to agree a settlement. They say their previous action has made the companies see sense. They do still have a strike mandate, so they could go on strike at any point in the next 6 months. But let's face it, these talks have been going on for some time, since all this started way back in June. Network Rail says nothing's changed in terms of its offer of 4% pay rise this year, 4% next year, and a further year of no compulsory redundancies and some other family rail perks. It's all part of a package, they say.
And that was rejected by the RMT in July.
Well, absolutely, yes, but they say nothing has changed as far as they're concerned. So it's interesting they are now around the table. That is good news, I think, we'll see. It's positive. All sides seem keen to get back around the table, ramp up negotiations, but in the short term, as you say, bad news. Monday is also likely to see lots of disruption, but from Tuesday, things should be starting to get back to normal.
Mark Ashton, thank you. Listening to that, Anna Jane Hunter, a rail operations consultant and former Network Rail director of the North of England. Afternoon to you.
Hi.
Hello there. Look, we didn't expect this announcement. It seems that even though the strike's been called off, there will still be a lack of services. Why is that?
So, yeah, it's the announcement we've all been hoping for, but actually when it comes so late in the day as it has on a Friday, quite late afternoon on a Friday in advance of a Monday, it doesn't give the people involved in planning the service for Monday very much time to row back on what's been put in place in preparation for the strike. So unfortunately, though it's good news that we've had the announcement, it will still lead to disruption on Monday.
What hope would you have of the two sides coming together now? We're hearing about intensive negotiations. There's a new government, a newly appointed rail minister, Hugh Merriman, who says the government wants to work positively and constructively to find a solution. Do you think this is the moment?
I really hope so. And, you know, these are the type of announcements we've been hoping for and waiting for months now. Often a change of guard, so to speak, can lead to, you know, a change of direction and some positivity in the negotiations. Hopefully that's the case. And I know Hugh Merriman's well thought of, you know, in terms of his work with the Rail Select Committee, and that can't be a bad thing, you know, in this picture.
But isn't there still stalemate? I mean, at the essence of this, there's pay and conditions and no compulsory redundancies, the unions say. Network Rail say they want to make changes to make the service more financially viable. The offer that they offered to the RMT was rejected. Since then, something must have happened, in your view, do you think, to get the talks back on? And what might that be?
Look, I don't know anything about the detail of the discussions in the room, but I do know it's very complex. It's not just about Network Rail. It also involves the train operating companies, of which there are many and many different sets of terms and conditions. This is a really complex set of negotiations, and it's no wonder it's taken, a lot of energy and a lot of time to get to this stage. But hopefully this is the turning point, and this is going to lead to a positive resolution for everyone involved who's worked so hard on this over the past months.
But at a time of cost of living crisis, the unions, of course, say that the pay offer hasn't been enough. They don't want compulsory redundancies. Do you think that the rail operating companies, Network Rail, would be prepared to meet those demands?
Look, finances are constrained in the industry following the pandemic and, the failure to recover passenger numbers. Since then, we've got to be realistic about the gap in funding. But I think the will is there to find a way to reach a resolution that suits everyone. It's not all about pay. It's about other things, as you said. The two sides are determined to find, I think, a solution that does work. The railway's never been in favour of compulsory redundancies in certainly my time and as far as I know before that, it's a last resort whenever it's been necessary. It's been really as a last resort. I think that continues to be the case, and there's usually a way of finding other solutions to those problems if they can be found.
I mean, there have been 10-11 days of action like this since July, and the public are getting really fed up with the rail service, even when it is running and there aren't strikes. The whole rail community does feel really dysfunctional at the moment, doesn't it? How do you think that public confidence in the railway system can be re-established?
I think we've just got to all continue to work together in the industry, which I'm proud to be part of, and I know those who work as part of the industry are proud to try and improve it and continue to try and improve it. It's tough times for everyone. It's not just rail workers who are seeking pay rises. It's not just rail workers who are balloting for strike. But there are issues to be worked through. There's a modernisation agenda. There's return of passenger figures and revenue alongside that to be sought. And we've got to keep delivering for passengers and for freight that goes unmentioned in the background and continues to run and will run on Monday, is part of the strike plan. So it's a complex system not without its issues, but there's definitely a will and the people involved to reach a resolution, and I'm sure that's what they're working towards.
Anna Jane Hunter, thank you very much, former Network Rail Director of the North of England. Time now is coming up to 13 minutes past 5. Here's Andrew.
Rail strikes planned for tomorrow, Monday and Wednesday have been called off, but travellers have been warned there'll still be major disruption to journeys. A group of tourists, including a small number of Britons, has been taken hostage in northern Peru by an indigenous group protesting about oil spills in a river. Arts Council England has announced a major shake-up of funding, with renowned London groups like the English National Opera and the Royal Opera House losing out to regional organisations.
Thank you. The COP27 summit in Egypt this weekend is the latest in the global effort to tackle climate change. Rishi Sunak is attending after all. King Charles isn't. Instead, the monarch held his own Buckingham Palace climate change reception with 200 campaigners and politicians this afternoon, including the Prime Minister, who spoke afterwards.
Delivering on the promise of Glasgow is more important than ever. More important because, as we have seen so starkly with the war in Ukraine, it is vital to invest in secure, renewable sources of energy and sustainable food production. More important because every moment we allow climate change to ravage our planet, we will see more human suffering, like the devastating floods in Pakistan. And more important because if we do not act today, we will risk leaving an ever more desperate inheritance for our children tomorrow.
Alok Sharma is an MP and the outgoing president for COP26. He spoke to the week in Westminster here on Radio 4 and urged countries to deliver on their pledges.
Well, I think if we look back to Glasgow, overall what we did was to keep alive the prospect of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees. And that's so vitally important. We're currently at 1.2 degrees of average global warming across the world. And we see the impact of that right now in different continents. So I would describe what we got over the line as a win, but it was a fragile win. And of course, we've had some delivery, but we need to do more and we need to go further and faster. I think the window is closing on 1.5. There is progress that is being made. We just need to go a lot faster.
Well, the UN warned last week the global effort to cut emissions is woefully inadequate and means that the world is on track for catastrophe. So will COP27 move the dial on tackling climate change? Here's our climate editor, Justin Rolat.
Cyclones have ripped through Madagascar earlier this year. There's been record-breaking temperatures and climate-related disasters around the world, but Africa has been hit particularly hard. Another year of low rainfall pushed parts of Somalia and elsewhere in East Africa even closer to famine, while huge floods displaced more than 1 million people in Nigeria last month.
Hearing no objections, it is so decided.
The last UN climate conference in Glasgow ended on a high note with ambitious pledges from many nations. Egypt wants this year to be about delivering on those pledges, and that is an even more ambitious task.
COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh will take place at a critical moment for our planet.
The Egyptian government says the theme will be implementation. What that really means is getting the rich world to deliver on its promises of finance for poorer countries, like the $100 billion a year it promised way back in 2009 would be available from 2020 to help developing nations move away from fossil fuels and adapt to the changing climate. 2 years on, and it still hasn't been paid in full. And Egypt also wants to know who's going to pay for the loss and damage climate change is already causing. Remember the terrible floods in Pakistan this summer? They left a third of the country underwater and left the Pakistani government demanding action. You caused the climate problem, burning the fossil fuels that made you rich, Pakistan's Climate Minister Sherry Rehman said to the developed world. Now you need to help us recover from the impacts it is bringing. Here she is.
There's a lot of money for war, for instance, in the system always when it's needed. 20 years there was a war next door. It was costing $300 million a day. So I don't think it's an impossible ask.
Pakistan will pack a real punch at the talks as chair of a group of 134 developing nations, including China. The head of the UN, Antonio Guterres, has warned of a crisis of trust if there isn't progress on the issue.
We need to tell the truth. And the truth is that the impact of climate change on a number of countries in the world, especially in the hotspots, is already devastating. And those countries need support. And support will have to be provided. I mean, if not, life will be a total disaster.
But with a war in Europe and soaring food and energy prices, wealthy countries say they already have lots of calls on their cash. They don't want to sign up to an open-ended commitment that could end up costing hundreds of billions of dollars. The US climate envoy, John Kerry, told the BBC the world's focus should remain on trying to cut emissions to minimize future climate change.
We have an enormous challenge ahead of us to stop the damage from happening. And lots of countries are contributing to that damage today, including in the developing world. So we have to move faster to get off of coal. We have to move faster to reduce fossil fuel consumption.
So there is real potential for conflict and disagreement at the conference in Egypt. In short, don't expect any big breakthroughs.
Justin Rolat. Well, as we've heard, the host of COP27 is Egypt. Dr. Mahmoud Mokhadin is one of the UN climate change high-level champions and used to be Egypt's Minister for Investment. So what about what Justin said there about a potential for conflict and disagreement and not expecting any big breakthrough? Well, Dr. Mokhaddin agrees that we should go into COP27 with managed expectations.
We need to keep pushing in areas that we see progress in, and we need to bring back some other areas that may have not got attention as they should in the past. And in the climate action, I'd like to take them in the 4 areas of the Paris Agreement, because there is some relative improvement in one track compared to the other. So I would say that there is great opportunity for progress, even after the Ukraine crisis and some sort of U-turns by some particular countries in the short term. But still, I see the momentum in investments in decarbonization and investments in renewables.
You do see that, do you? Because, I mean, one of the big factors in trying to limit global emissions to 1.5 degrees of warming is to really move towards quitting fossil fuels, and the energy crisis, the Ukraine war, we know, is impeding that aim.
Yes, it created 2 waves at the same time. The first one is the short-term reaction, super pragmatic, very flexible, burning anything that authorities and responsible entities can burn in order to create energy, including from fossil fuel, including from coal. But at the same time, there is another wave happening that we see it in markets with more investments in renewables, in wind, solar, and more today actually in green hydrogen. In that particular area, I would expect some breakthroughs.
We've heard the warnings from the UN. The warnings have been there and shouted long and hard. So really, for you, given everything that you've talked about and the climate that we're in at the moment, politically and economically, what would a successful COP meeting in Egypt look like for you? What do you think is the minimum that you'd like to have achieved?
A few things, really. Definitely putting matters related to implementation as a priority is key. Putting Africa and developing economies in a positive context here to attract investment after the announcements is another great opportunity. And then the third aspect is about adaptation. How can we get adaptation into action? And finally, how can we do a better job in getting all sources of finance, from public, private to domestic and external sources, in order to push the climate action agenda further? And that will happen only if we realize that the reductionist approach that has been adopted in the past is not going to be helping us. We need to put climate action within sustainable development and within the crisis management policies that we are pushing to have today to deal with the problems from Ukraine to the COVID crisis as well.
What would make you a happy man at the end of this conference?
Yeah, it's finance. Because all of the above boils down to finance and funding. What we need to see, and again with reference to Glasgow, I think one of the most celebrated outcomes of Glasgow is the JETP project for South Africa, the $8.5 billion to phase out from coal, phase in renewables and deal with the impact on the communities. If we see multiples of such projects but with more commitments, here I can say, well, we made some sort of progress. But if we go back to some sort of preaches and speeches about how important the climate action work should be, and the science is proving that we are not on track, everybody knows that, and at least the concerned public know that very well. But what we need is basically how to translate that into action, and action for us is basically about finance and investment.
Dr. Mokhaddin.
Calling occupants of interplanetary, most extraordinary, correct.
Well, the Carpenters sang about making contact with aliens, but what would happen if we ever did establish the existence of life beyond Earth? And as a human race, how should we prepare for the possibility of discovering we are not alone? A new international research hub at the University of St Andrews is coordinated by Dr. John Elliott. Now, he explained how he has long researched the ways in which we might be able to interpret alien messages. It's all part of the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, or SETI, community. he explained what work his unit does.
It's really been born from years of me thinking about what to do and being involved with SETI. The one thing that hasn't been done before is bringing all the sciences together that we need to deal with an event like this if and when it happens.
And SETI being the search for extraterrestrial intelligence.
Intelligence, that's right.
And do you think that there is?
Our own Milky Way, our own local galaxy, is 100,000 light years in diameter, 100,000 light years thick. It's 13.6 billion years old. It has up to about 400 billion stars in it. It also is looking like there's at least, on average, one planet around every star, but probably more. We may have up to something like 1 trillion planets in our own galaxy. And a reasonable number of them will be ones that you would find to support life.
With those sort of statistics, you're convinced that out there must be some sort of life that we could communicate. But how? I mean, where do you start?
You start with looking at what you know. And I've personally looked at over 60 different human languages, all different types over history, and looked at the structures underneath them, as well as dolphin language and other, what you would call intelligent other animals on our planet, and how they communicate. And underlying the veneer on top, in our case, the written language or the sounds we make, it's not random. It can't be just junk put in any way. It has to be put in a certain way, and that way is, in a simplistic way, patterns are put together, and you can start to devise methods, algorithms, mathematical models, and all the rest of it. When you receive something unknown, you start with that baseline and to deconstruct it and then build it up again and start to realise how it's pieced together, or you realise it's random junk.
Of course, there's always that question about, is it the right thing to respond, to try to put out a hand of friendship, or would that be telling malevolent aliens just come here and colonise us?
Certainly the consensus for scientists is 50-50 pretty much. Certainly with this hub, which is the bringing all together what we call post-detection expertise, and that's the whole idea of it, is to bring everything from linguistics, maths, astrobiology, psychology, philosophy, law, we've got space law, even how it affects our own human laws, protocols and global impact strategies. You're bringing together one of the greatest multidisciplinary endeavours ever to be undertaken together.
Absolutely. And when do you have any idea when you might make contact?
No, of course you don't. It could be tomorrow. Hopefully it's not, because we're just beginning this particular project, this endeavour that will really, in all intents and purposes, should be here forevermore.
Does this mean that you, Dr. Elliott, can never take a day off?
Oh yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, things have happened before that we've discovered a microbe that showed evidence that possibly wasn't on our evolutionary tree about 10 or 12 years ago. I was about to go on holiday. Next thing I know, I'm spending all day in BBC studios, wondering when my flight was going to be. So it's exactly it. Yeah, I sort of, in a sense, I've got to be ready at any point.
Dr. John Elliott, never go away. You never know when they might make contact. We're coming up to news time, but first let's get a word from the new host of Any Questions. It's Alex Forsyth. News about tonight's programme. Hello, Alex. What have you got for us?
Well, we're at East Midlands Airport, which is our venue for tonight's programme. This is an international airport, transporting both passengers and billions of pounds of freight every year. And if you hear the odd tannoy in the background, well, it's because we're in the departures hall. There are check-in desks behind me, and in front of me, the chairs, ready for our audience and our panel. This week, it's Lee Rowley, Conservative MP for North East Derbyshire and Minister for Local Government, the Labour MP for Derby South, Dame Margaret Beckett, academic and writer Dr. Maya Goodfellow, and Sherelle Jacobs, a columnist for the Daily Telegraph. It is taking all of my efforts not to make some sort of pun about high flyers talking political turbulence, so I will just say, do join us, 8 o'clock here on Radio 4.
Alex, thank you very much indeed. It's 5:29 now. Andrew's here with your PM News Summary.
The RMT union has called off a rail strike that had been planned for tomorrow, Monday and Wednesday. In a statement, the union said it had secured a promise from the train operators to make a pay offer and was now entering what it called a period of intensive negotiations. Network Rail has welcomed the move but said the late notice meant some services still wouldn't run tomorrow. Downing Street has confirmed it's going ahead with a plan to build a nuclear power station in Suffolk, despite officials telling the BBC earlier that the construction of Sizewell C was under review. Ministers have been examining ways to save money on big projects ahead of the autumn statement. A new high-speed rail line linking Liverpool with Hull via Bradford is likely to be scaled back. A group of indigenous people in the Peruvian Amazon have detained around 70 tourists, including British nationals, as a protest against authorities' handling of an oil spill. One of the tourists says they've been told they'll be held for up to 8 days if there's no resolution. The Foreign Office says it's in contact with the authorities in Peru. The English National Opera in London is to lose its £12.6 million Arts Council grant. Instead, it'll receive £17 million over 3 years and possibly relocate to Manchester. The change is part of efforts to move funding for cultural institutions away from the capital. The First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, has denied that the awarding of a contract to a Scottish company to build ferries was a case of jobs for the boys. She was giving evidence to a Holyrood committee about the procurement of 2 ferries, which are 5 years late and 3 times over budget. People working at Twitter have begun hearing they're being sacked. The company is embarking on a cost-cutting drive, and it's believed about half of the 8,000-strong workforce could lose their jobs. And Hong Kong has been holding its annual food carnival, promising a 9-day explosion of cuisine, fun and revelry. There is one catch, though. Visitors are forbidden to eat anything because of COVID rules.
Andrew, thank you. Well, as you heard from Andrew there in the past hour, many people who'd worked for Twitter received an email. It read, "Twitter is conducting a workforce reduction to help improve the health of the company. These decisions are never easy. It's with regret that we write to inform you that your role at Twitter has been impacted." In other words, as Lord Sugar might more succinctly put it, you're fired. It's all been changed since the Tesla and SpaceX owner Elon Musk bought the social media platform in a £39.3 billion deal last week. He's already removed the entire board and is now the sole executive. He's been looking to cut around half of the workforce, that's 3,700 Twitter staff to go, as he seeks to slash costs and impose a demanding new work ethic. Simon Balmain was, until today, senior community manager at Twitter, no longer. I spoke to him earlier.
I've been primarily working with a lot of US colleagues, so I was still awake in the sort of early hours of this morning around when we received this email confirming that there was to be this headcount reduction. It stated that if we were impacted by it, we'd hear more to our personal email addresses. If we were not, we would hear to our work email addresses. And within an hour of that email going out, I noticed that my MacBook flashed and it was remotely sort of wiped or logged out, unable to get back in with a message saying, look for more information in your personal email. Obviously, at that point, I checked Gmail, G Suite, Slack, all the sort of tools that we use at the company, and found that access had been revoked to all of those as well.
Had you had any warning at all that you might lose your job?
Just that general email that had gone out to everybody less than an hour before that happened, yeah.
And now it's confirmed.
Well, there's a process, right? Because every country and territory has very specific labor laws and employment laws that you have to abide by. So they're following up with these messages that still say, at risk, right? But you don't remove somebody's access from all systems if that's the case. I don't believe that for a second. Those meetings will happen. Discussions will be had as is consistent with the employment laws that exist in this country. They will find out that I have a lot of experience with employment tribunals and I know what I'm talking about. So, I'll make sure that those things happen the correct way that they're supposed to happen.
So you're determined to pursue this then? You're not going to take
absolutely.
It lying down?
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, look, there's going to be an awful lot of sympathy for you and other people who thought they had a job last week and now find they haven't. But getting rid of half the workforce, he says that it's to make the company leaner, to make it more financially viable. If he thinks he can get rid of the workforce and still carry on as before, aren't people going to say, well, what were you and others actually doing? Were you worth being employed? Sorry to put it like that, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, absolutely. And people are free to have those thoughts, what I would say is it lacks a lot of context, it lacks a lot of nuance, it lacks the understanding of how important institutional knowledge and understanding of the systems that exist, how that all works. It's not an easy job. It's very relationship-based between, at least in my role, very relationship-based between myself and the users. I work directly with power users of the product on new features, and many of them will be very confused and scratching their heads and wondering if as users they should proceed with using these products.
And what's your opinion of Elon Musk now?
I have a personal principle that I really try very hard to be an empathetic individual and to not judge people personally that I don't know or haven't had personal interactions with. And you know, since this acquisition happened, we did not receive any communication from the new acquirers and their team. So it's very hard for me to have a personal judgment on somebody that I don't know. I think he's playing a very dangerous game. It's potentially not as simple as he thinks that it might be, and experiencing, you know, whether you've been very successful in building cars or ships or spaceships or, you know, whatever that might be, that's not necessarily guaranteed to transfer over to communication and information and users and trust. That's not a guarantee by any means.
Simon Balmain, one of those Twitter employees who's received that email. Well, it was back in 2020 that Bruce Daisley cut his ties with Twitter. He was a vice president of the company for 8 years, and he's written a book called Fortitude, Unpicking the Myth of Resilience. Bruce Daisley, thanks for joining us this afternoon. Can I just get, first of all, your reaction to what's been happening today?
Certainly, we heard earlier this week that the word of the year is permacrisis, and Elon seems to be channeling it. He seems to have that knack that we witness with a few figures in the public eye, where he seems to be determined to be in everyone's conscious attention every minute of the day. And look, you know, I think as the last interviewee said, there's a lack of grace to this. You know, I think anyone who's worked in a company knows that there are sometimes those fearful days where jobs are cut. But the way that he's done this has lacked any sense of empathy, respect. You know, for the richest guy in the world, he behaves like a guy who's going broke tomorrow. And it's just a really strange pattern of behaviour.
His point, I suppose, and he is a businessman, a very successful businessman. He's taken on a platform now that's struggling to make a profit, and he seems to be saying one way to fix the problem is by making a dent in the wage bill.
Yeah, I'd push back on that. So until the last 2 years, Twitter was making a 30% margin. So most businesses around the world would happily do that. There is an obsession in Silicon Valley that your growth has to be stratospheric, and they want stock prices that are based on the audience doubling. And so as a consequence, it's almost a virus that afflicts that whole sector, that unless you're growing at these dizzying rates, somehow your business has got no value. The end consequence of that, and the end victim of that, is people who have maybe sort of shepherded. And effectively, look, I've seen some of the tweets that have gone out today. It's very easy to say we're going to run the same business on half the numbers, but one of the people who got fired today is the man who monitors the abusive tweets to celebrities and Premiership footballers. Now, we've got the World Cup in 3 weeks. This week we witnessed that sewage waste off the coast of Cornwall, an externality that a business had transferred to the environment. If footballers are experiencing racist tweets in the next 4 weeks, that's an externality that Elon Musk is transferring to society. He's making society worse by improving his balance sheet. And there does seem to be a consequence. We do need to think about the societal impact of these things.
Do you think there will be a tangible difference to Twitter users and those observing the platform? I mean, there has been, and there is this continuing debate about whether free speech should be allowed more on the platform, but also keeping up standards and making sure that dangerous content doesn't make it on there. Do you think that there is a bit of a slippery slope now, or do you think that standards can still be maintained?
Elon himself, I don't want to call him by his first name, Mr. Musk himself, this last weekend shared a slanderous link, a slanderous lie about the attack on the husband of Nancy Pelosi, and it was a horrible lie, so bad that even he had to take it down. And it's alarming when billionaires are holding the access points to the products that largely are becoming the infrastructure of communication and democracy. They're the 21st century version of newspapers. If they're holding the purse string, yesterday he was in discourse with the quite high-profile American House of Representatives member Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and he effectively was sort of bullying her on the platform. Her use of the Twitter app seemed to have been disrupted after she took issue with him, and he was sort of treating it as a joke for his brogue followers. It's alarming, and I think
he says, of course, he vows that Twitter will not become a free-for-all hellscape. His quote, where anything can be said with no consequences.
And yet 3 days after that, he tweeted something that was a slanderous lie about the attack in his own house of an 80-year-old man.
Where do you think this goes then now?
We've got to fact check Elon, haven't we?
Yeah, and I mean, do you think that now the platform itself might be in trouble if advertisers like Carlsberg and General Motors continue not to put advertising on it?
Absolutely. I think right now anyone might be looking and saying, I'm not sure that even the way that he is bringing down the discourse is a good place. In truth, run well and with good moderation, social media can be a force for good. I think a lot of us who use social media understand this conflicted relationship we've got with it. We see bad things, but also it can be a force for incredible good. I would say that with a degree of moderation, in Germany there's a lot more regulation and the environment is much better. Regulation can improve social media, and it's not about cutting your workforce.
Moderation and regulation. Thank you so much, Bruce Daisley, for talking to us about the changes at Twitter. Now it's 5:40. The Russian-appointed deputy governor of the Kherson region has been calling for civilians to leave parts of the province on the west bank of the Dnipro River, where Ukrainian forces have retaken ground in recent weeks. The deputy governor issued several video appeals saying that Russian forces were soon expected to withdraw from the area. It follows Vladimir Putin saying on the Rossiya 24 news channel that civilians should be removed from places of the most dangerous military activities in the Kherson region. But a Ukrainian official has called Russia's move a trap and said it was making the settlements appear safer, but setting them up as a pretext for street battles. Russia, of course, illegally annexed the region from Ukraine in September, and Ukrainian forces have since launched a counter-offensive to take back control. We've been speaking with a Ukrainian man, Mikhail, who lives on the West Bank. He told us what it was like living in an occupied area.
For a prolonged period, almost 10 days, there was no internet connection, and people have lost all means of entertaining themselves. And of course, with all these evacuation stories, because the Russians spreading the panic through the mass media, through the TV and through the telephone messages, that people must evacuate and there will be street fighting here. And of course, they have also forced to close all the pharmacy stores, and now from today also the hospitals are not working, and the news also say that only 10 ambulances will remain here in the city. Also the transport, the vehicles which were used by the utility services, they are all gone. There is a right bank of the Dnieper River, the Kherson itself, and the left bank. And on the left bank, I know exactly, I have still some relatives and friends there, and people are forced to live. Here in the Kherson, it's not like this. It's more still like on your own. If you like, you may go. If you don't like, you stay. What we were told here, that the population from the right bank should go to Crimea, Krasnodar region, and obtain some certificate for the house or for the apartment, whatever. So I'm able to go out freely. Shopping is a little bit difficult. It's not the right word to say, and we can only buy here the food. So to buy the food or some hygiene, yes, it's possible to do this, and we are still doing this. You may even use some cafeterias. There are still some cafeterias, restaurants working here. Every day I go out, every time I go out, I see Russian soldiers or some kind of police, military police.
well as fireworks. Another event is at Dulwich Sports Club, who have got a new, bigger layout this year for people to enjoy the food and drink stands. There's also a big display in Battersea Park as well tomorrow, and Morden Park too. And then Beckenham Fireworks in the park at Croydon Recreation Ground is also tomorrow, which has a fun fair. And I really like this detail. They've got a fireworks display for younger viewers, which they use smaller bangs for anyone who might be scared. So that's at 6 p.m, and then the main event with the big bang fireworks is at 7:45. And then on Sunday there's a family-friendly event at Richmond Athletics Ground with mulled wine for the parents, and Battersea Park reboots and goes again on Sunday too. And then it's worth mentioning quickly, Jumoke, that some councils haven't actually brought their displays back this year after the COVID cancellations for reasons like the rising cost of living, and also environmental reasons too have been cited. Hammersmith and Fulham isn't holding its show at Ravenscourt, and the council says they're preparing for a laser show to take place in 2023 instead. Hackney Council has cancelled the Bonfire Night fireworks in Clissold Park to save money, and Southwark Council has called off the firework display in Southwark Park, and they say that at the moment they've got no plans to bring it back in the future. And then just finally, London Fire Brigade is asking people to be extremely careful if they can't get tickets to an official fireworks display, and if they want to set off fireworks at home, to just make sure that they're buying them from licensed sellers, and also warnings of things like sparklers. They stay really, really hot and can cause severe burns even after they've been put out. So lots of fun to be had this weekend across London, but they just want to make sure that we're doing it safely as well.
Thank you ever so much, Helen. Really appreciate it. Helen Hodnott reporting for us there, live at the early start on the celebrations in Camden this evening. So that was your little something for the weekend, some things to look forward to. Well, in the next 10 minutes, well, less than 10 minutes, it's sport. And I'm so excited because I get to speak to Mr. Phil Parry.
We've definitely got something for the weekend. We always do.
Yes,
on sport.
Of course,
there's lots of it, Jamaica.
But I have a question for you.
Go on.
Qatar and FIFA and the issuing of a sort of concentrate on football and not anything else. What's your take on it, and why do you think they felt that they needed to issue that statement today?
Well, there's been a lot of discussion about the controversy about selecting Qatar and staging the World Cup there, and I think it's probably caused quite a bit of soul searching for quite a lot of people, whether it's players, whether it's those involved with FAs, whether it's those even involved in covering it, whether they want to. The reason why FIFA have probably done this is because they want the attention on their competition. They don't want their competition to be affected by these sort of discussions. Well, I think a lot of people might turn around and go, tough, you made this call, you made this decision. People have questioned it throughout, beforehand, afterwards, and continually. So good luck with it, is what some people may say, because yes, the focus on the football will be important, and people will get behind that, and they'll watch their teams if they're supporting a particular team, if they've got a reason for doing so. But an event like this is still going to lead to asking questions. I heard Gary Lineker this week talking on a podcast somewhere else, talking about the fact that yes, they are working out how, as an organisation, and the coverage that we're going to give it here at the BBC, how it will be done, whereby it isn't still just put into the background. So they may want people to just focus on the football, but I don't think that's probably an impossible reality as far as FIFA are concerned, because this has caused controversy. But there have been other events, there's been other sporting events, and there will continue to be so. Russia was questioned in 2018. There's been question marks about other locations of other sporting events and decisions. And as much as the organisers or the owners or the individual clubs may want, or individual competition organisers may want, it is also the job of media and those with questions to continue to ask questions, isn't it, Jamaica, I would say.
Well, let's see. Let's hope those questions continue to be asked during the tournament, which starts in a couple of weeks' time. But back to today, what's coming up?
We've got lots to look forward to. We might talk about Harry Kane dancing, but it went viral. I mean, is that dancing? I mean, if that's dancing, then I'm still relevant.
I think we need a comparison.
Yeah.
I think to make a really good point, you need to kind of do a little dancey video, put it side by side. You'll go viral on TikTok, I promise you.
It's a good point, yeah. So we might talk about that. There's some fantastic fans at Arsenal last night and lots of football. And it's the FA Cup. So we're hopefully talking to someone who's going to be playing one of our teams, but for whom tomorrow is going to be a very, very special occasion. And we're going to reflect on a fan base that's got a very unusual story. Those are two things coming up.
Oh, you're very mysterious.
Yeah, I like to be mysterious, don't we? Yeah, we'll keep them guessing, you see. Keep them keen, and then they'll come and listen.
Well, they'll always listen. Thank you ever so much, Phil Parry and the sports team from 6 o'clock here. That's about it for my first show, the Friday show with my Jumoke Fashion Show. I think I'll call it the Jumoke Show. Might be slightly easier. Thank you all for joining in so brilliantly, and also really engaging on social media, both on Twitter and on Instagram. I know you were laughing very much at my glasses, but you know, it is a thing. I needed to put those glasses on just in case anything happened for the experiment. My thanks to all my brilliant guests this afternoon. It's been such a joy to be back in the hot seat. I am not here next week because I already had a prearranged engagement, shall we say. But I'll be back the week after. Of course, I'll be here this Sunday from 6 through 9 a.m. presenting Sunday Breakfast. My thanks to the fabulous Marcia for all her hard work in setting up the show today. She had very little time to do it, but she did it absolutely brilliant. To Alice for producing and the rest of the team. Listen, stay tuned to BBC Radio London. I'll leave you with a bit of Tony Braxton and Unbreak My Heart.